Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Sierra Stone. I work here at GSV and am really excited to spend part of our morning together. Hello, Dr. Darling-Hammond. It is so nice to see you again. Thank you for tuning in with us this morning. We have a large audience here with us, excited to hear from you and ask you some questions. So this morning, how this is going to work is we're going to start, Dr. Darling-Hammond will start with about a 20-minute keynote presentation, and then we will go into a live audience Q&A. So how that will work is if you have the ASU+GSV Summit app downloaded and you go search for this session in the agenda, you can ask your questions directly through the app, and then I will be sure to get to as many questions as possible once we get into the Q&A portion. So, Dr. Darling-Hammond, I am going to pass the mic over to you, and we'll hear from you for about 20 minutes before the Q&A portion.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see everyone. And I appreciate being able to beam in, given schedules and all of that. We were just saying that we couldn't have done this 10 years ago, so it's just a sign of all of the changes that are going on, and I'm going to talk more about them. First, I'm going to try to share my screen here. And see if we can get the technology to work. Give me 1 second here.
Yep, we see your screen.
Awesome. There we go. So I just want to say that there's so many wonderful events at ASU+GSV every year showing us what's possible in education. And I want to build on that, but talk about how we need to transform the system we inherited to allow the unique to become commonplace, to provide a joyful, engaging, effective, empowering education for every child rather than just the lucky few. America is the land of innovations, but we rarely scale them up in a way that transforms the experience of education for everyone. I feel some urgency around this need to reinvent the public education system. Those are my 2 oldest grandchildren, and they are coming along towards school. There's a lot to do for them to have the experience we want them to have before they get there. This is the youngest one who is, as you can see, learning to love himself. So we have an agenda, certainly not only in the family, but in our profession to transform schools. And, you know, we know that we've experienced a public health crisis, an economic crisis, a climate crisis. I'm going to come back to that, a civil rights crisis in recent years, which have really highlighted the longstanding inequalities and limitations in our societies and education systems. Those have become front and center. The effects of the pandemic are still with us. We have greater child poverty and homelessness. We've seen a huge spike in California and elsewhere that has not yet receded. We have widening achievement gaps that are a matter of great concern. Chronic absenteeism, some of that is because of ongoing illnesses and even climate events, but a great deal of it is also students opting out from the system that we have built. Declining enrollment is a part of that, and deepening staff shortages as a growing number of educators also opt out from the system that we have inherited. But at the same time, we have greater technology capacity that we could be taking advantage of. People now know how to use technology, both students and adults. We have a greater appreciation for social emotional learning and the need for relationship-centered schools. We have a lot of innovations, including new school designs that have been sparked by educators during this time. And the question is, how do we take advantage of those opportunities to address the challenges that are also part of what we're experiencing today? And when we have this kind of amazing disruption in human history, we have those moments that can lead to social changes on a wide scale. But the system we inherited still impedes transformation at scale. And I appreciate all of the great work that educators are doing to try to meet all of the challenges and innovating in the course of it. We've got to help them by dealing with that system. Ellen Lageman once put it, she was a professor at Teachers College, and then president of a foundation. She said, one cannot understand the history of education in the United States during the 20th century unless one realizes that E.L. Thorndike won and John Dewey lost. She was a historian of education. And what did she mean by that? Well, at the turn of the 20th century, John Dewey believed in experiential, student-centered education, focused on child development, adolescent development in democratic communities. Many progressives were working on that agenda, building schools around that vision. Thorndike is best known for his work on testing. He was into administrative systems, grades, tests, requirements, top-down mandates that were thought to be efficient. The supremacy of those values really did take over the design of schools in the early 1900s. We adopted the factory model from Henry Ford. It was the latest thing to do. The assembly line tried to design as compulsory education was coming online, and there were many people coming to urban centers. Large schools were designed to be efficient in terms of the dollars per square foot and to pass students along an efficient assembly line. The Prussian age grading system and the platoon system allowed students to move to a different teacher for each grade level and then to a different teacher within middle and high school for each subject area to be more efficient in processing students. As a result of that, students in the United States see more than twice as many teachers as in many other higher achieving countries where they allow students to stay with the same teacher for multiple years and organize high schools in a way that gives more time with a smaller number of teachers. Teachers were placed as individual workers on that assembly line to plan and teach alone, and the idea was that you implement the prescribed curriculum just the way you'd put a windshield on a car and pass the kids on to the next 45-minute class for the next assembly line experience. Curriculum was prescribed based on time and motion studies and focused very much on rote learning, remembering, and spitting things back for tests. Tracking was designed to create differential conveyor belts for students by race and class. Schools were explicitly designed to select and sort rather than to develop talent. And just to give you a sense of what the discourse was as we created this system, Elwood Cubberley, who was the Stanford University Education School Dean, I am sorry to say, because I spent quite a bit of time of my career at Stanford, found that new immigrants were, quote, a very different type from North Europeans, illiterate, docile, lacking in self-reliance and initiative, not possessing the Anglo-Teutonic conceptions of law, order, and government. He said our city schools will soon be forced to give up the exceedingly democratic idea that all are equal and begin a specialization of educational effort. W.B. Pillsbury at University of Michigan argued that schools should take on the role of selecting the men of best intelligence from the deficient and mediocre and allowing, in fact, encouraging those who could not immediately succeed in the system to drop out and pass into the ranks of unskilled labor. Then there would be those who could become clerical workers and a small number who could get the kind of education that would allow them to be selected for the professions. Lewis Terman, also at Stanford, and the IQ test developer, argued that of those he had tested, 80% of the immigrants were feeble-minded, and furthermore that Indians, Mexicans, and Negroes should be segregated in special classes. They cannot master abstractions. They can often be made efficient workers. To this day, you will see the results of that selection and sorting system in tracking and the assembly line structures in our large high schools. The results are deeply problematic even now because we have structures that are not designed to allow students to be well-known or well-supported. When I was teaching high school, I had 180 kids a day passing by in groups of 30 for 6 periods, 45 or 50 minutes at a time. And as much as I cared, I could not care effectively for each of those students. I did not plan with other teachers. We did not have a system by which kids could be supported and well known. Teachers with large pupil loads are still isolated in ed crate classrooms. In those schools, students, rotate through to be stamped with standardized curriculum. We have In order to master the grade level standards, often pacing guides that move kids at a prescribed pace, even though we know that they don't learn at the same pace and in the same way, which prevents teachers from meeting specific student needs. We've got a very narrow testing system. We test students more frequently on an annual basis than any other country in the world, and with more use of multiple choice tests than other countries, which use more open-ended and sometimes even project-based assessments. And that makes it harder to engage in powerful learning. We have punitive rules in many places to achieve compliance, and lots of student exclusion from school, which often then becomes also racially discriminatory, which leads to student exclusion and teacher exhaustion, and unequal treatment is baked into the system. In a recent survey of secondary school students, only 30% said that they felt that they were in a caring environment. And so we've got a lot of structural demands that we have to address. The vestiges of that system are still with us. Jal Mader wrote recently that deeper learning has a race problem. Students in more affluent schools are given the kind of problem-solving education that befits the future managerial class. Students in lower tracts and higher poverty schools get the kind of rule-following tasks that mirror much of the factory and other working class work. So many of these features that our educators are trying to work against and adapt their innovations to are still driving the system that we have. We also have a very well-established set of inequalities that begin with growing poverty and segregation, a growing number of schools that serve only high poverty students, mostly African American and Latino, then we pile on unequal school resources to that. 30 plus states give less money to the education of the students who have greater needs than they do to those with fewer needs. That leads to an inequitable distribution of well-qualified educators, which then has pedagogical effects, as well as driving less access to high-quality curriculum and often dysfunctional schools, because when teachers don't have an adequate investment in their knowledge base, we get poorly organized instruction that can lead to less investment in students' parts. They feel bored, they feel disconnected. That often leads to exclusionary discipline. That's harder to teach heterogeneous classes, so we get more tracking that way. And if you add implicit bias, there are assumptions that students and parents don't care that activate discriminatory treatment and stereotype threat, where any of us who hold an identity that is stigmatized in society, whether that's by race, class, immigration status, disability status, sexual orientation, carry a load of toxic stress, worrying about how we will be perceived and treated, that then undermines confidence and makes it very difficult to have a growth mindset. So all of these things are sort of baked into the system, and we doubled down on the factory model with No Child Left Behind, which added sanctions and testing without investing, which reinforced the sorting, labeling, and selecting aspects of schools. It added significant stress to teaching and learning, led to the loss of expert teachers, especially in high-need schools that were labeled as failing, required the closing of public schools in many communities, which it turns out was especially true in Black communities, and it also influenced the quality of instruction. During that era, the gaps between the United States and other nations actually grew, and we are we've declined in reading, science, and math, and ranked further down the rankings from other countries, because our tests, unlike the PISA tests, which are being shown here, are really focused on remembering or picking one answer out of 5, rather than demonstrating how you can apply your learning to new situations and use it. So we've been growing for 3 decades, a gap between affluent and white students in the United States and students of color and those in poverty, and between our country and students in other high-achieving nations that have made more systemic and equitable investments in education over the last 30 years. You will see in those high achieving nations that, for example, teaching is a respected profession. Teachers earn as much as other college educated workers. They are funded to go attend high quality teacher education programs for free. They get mentoring when they enter the profession, ongoing, again, free professional development, about 8 hours a week more of time for collaboration than US teachers get, because on the factory model, our teachers teach more hours per week and year than teachers anywhere else in the world, while earning about 25% less than other college educated workers and getting only as much preparation as they can afford to get and go into debt for. So those kinds of things, plus the design of schools, really leave us in a disadvantaged place relative to both the demands of the 21st century and the accomplishments in other high achieving nations. The Black-white achievement gap we're all familiar with, but we often forget that it was cut in half during the 60s and 70s because of the war on poverty, the large investments in educational equity that were made. And so we know what to do when we take a systemic approach. Had we stayed on course with those investments, we would have had no achievement gap by the year 2000. But instead, almost all of those policies were eliminated in the Reagan years, and the achievement gap reopened. Today, our achievement gap is 30% larger than it was 35 years ago. And as you can see, for African American students, the level of achievement since the pandemic in reading has gone down well below what it was 40 years ago. Meanwhile, we've got a world that's changed dramatically. We know that the demand for complex skills has been rapidly increasing, and the demand for routine skills has been rapidly decreasing. That's about to accelerate even more with AI over the next few years. Meanwhile, we're still teaching and testing skills that are lower order skills that are easier to digitize, automate, and outsource. Knowledge is growing exponentially. It is actually doubling now, faster than every year. So our kids are going to have to work with knowledge that hasn't been discovered yet, with technologies that haven't been invented yet, solving big problems that we haven't managed to solve, for which they will need a different kind of learning. I often use the example of Google, which is up the street from me here in Silicon Valley, where they did a big study looking at how all of the data they collected on their employees, from grades and transcripts and test scores and so on, predicted their success at Google. And they found out that none of those things predicted success at Google. It was really what they ended up calling learning ability that predicted success, which is really the ability to take a problem that is pretty unstructured, to find information, to analyze and evaluate, integrate that information to problem solve, develop solutions with others, and then take initiative to continually test, plan, implement, and improve what you're doing to learn to learn. And to have that kind of schooling, we have to move beyond many of the features of our current system. We also know more from neuroscience now about how to develop learning ability. We know about what develops the neural networks in our brain, which essentially create intelligences. Things like social interaction in rich environments, music, art, physical activity, multiple languages, emotional well-being, because social and emotional learning are completely integrated with academic learning and need to be attended to at the same time. Cultural well-being, knowing that who you are is accepted and is being built upon in your learning process. These features remind me of the schools I saw in Finland, where in elementary school, kids are learning multiple languages. All of them have 2 or 3 languages. Music and art occur every single day. Physical activity occurs multiple times each day. Kids are always getting an opportunity to go out and refresh their bodies as they are refreshing their minds. Learning is project-based. There is no external assessment. The assessments are designed by teachers around the multicultural and interdisciplinary curriculum framework that they have. And social interaction is at the heart of the learning process. By contrast, during NCLB, we had schools taking away music, art, recess, and a variety of other things just to focus in on drill and kill in reading and math. We also know that the development of neural networks is impaired by a variety of experiences that many students have in the traumatized situation they may experience in home and community as well as at school. Anxiety, loneliness, dietary deficiencies, toxins, identity threats. All of these are very prominent in the experience we allow children to have in this country. So when we think of the kind of schools we need, which have to move from that sort of do your own work at your desk as you fill in your worksheet approach to a collaborative inquiry-oriented approach, we need to then think about what is it that will allow us to get there. The type of schools we need would have a lot more oxytocin-producing experiences, the hugging hormone that floods the brain with the kinds of hormones that allow for neural connections to be further developed and for excitement and attention to occur, and much less cortisol, the stress hormone that actually shuts down the brain and really makes it difficult for us to process, to focus, to have attention, to remember. And we can use what we know now from the science of learning and development to design schools that have these kinds of positive developmental relationships, that create environments filled with safety and belonging, that offer those rich learning experiences, that explicitly develop social, emotional, and cognitive skills, habits, and mindsets, and provide the integrated supports in the form of both health supports and the kinds of academic supports, tutoring, and other things that allow students to be always engaged in a way that creates thriving for them. And there are many schools doing that. You've heard about many of them in the conference. We've documented many of them at the Learning Policy Institute that are showing extraordinary outcomes for students who normally are experiencing much less success. In the middle of this page is Social Justice Humanitas Academy in Los Angeles, just to give an example. This is a school which serves a population of kids 93% of whom are low income, 96% are Latinx, large numbers of English learners, and they achieve a 97% graduation rate. 95% of their students complete the college preparatory requirements of the UC system, what we fondly call A through G here in California. They far exceed the English language arts test scores of the state and the district. But it's designed as a community school with the wraparound supports, community-connected project-based learning, whole child development at the core, advisories, which are family groups that students participate in every day with a group of other students and an advisor who stays with them for multiple years, where they can engage in social emotional learning, community building, college readiness, support for whatever is happening academically, connection to resources that they may need if they've had a traumatic experience or have a special need. Teachers work in teams that share students. They have collaboration time. They're engaged in a variety of interdisciplinary curriculum projects and engaged in culturally responsive practices. They build a system around a whole child environment. One of the students in the case study noted, there's no point in doing great work if you're not a good person and you're not treating those around you well and looking out for their welfare. So they're building empathy, connecting with people at a deeper level, and building academic skills. Those kinds of schools exist all across the country, but they are at the margins, and we need to bring them to the center. We know a lot about those common features of redesigned schools, but we need a policy structure that will allow us to pursue this more routinely. We have to refocus the system so that our curriculum and assessment guidance from the federal and state governments really focuses on meaningful learning in an authentic way, We need to build professional capacity by investing, as other countries do, in our teachers and school leaders in ways that honor both their efforts and arm them with knowledge. We need to then be accountable for the resources that are needed to enact that kind of education and engage in continuous improvement. We have to understand that it's a systemic approach. In the United States, we often have, what's the one thing you would do, or what's the silver bullet, or can we do this single reform? We have to have a systemic vision for how to create safe and healthy communities, provide the resources that can enable supportive and inclusive schools in which quality teaching can routinely occur, and a deeper learning curriculum is the focal point for the work. And get the policies in place, from school funding reforms to new forms of accountability focused on learning opportunities, to, as I said, the kind of curriculum and assessment that supports meaningful learning, the school redesigns, the educator supports, and then investments in children's well-being, which is both a function of education and economic policy. I'm going to close with this question of what will be the history of 21st century education. One would want it to focus on what the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child. I'll also say grandparent. That must the community want for all of its children. Any other goal is narrow and unlovely. Acted upon, it destroys our democracy, and we see too much of that today. Only by being true to the full growth of all the individuals who make it up can society by any chance be true to itself. Maybe John Dewey will get the last word. Thank you. I know I've run over by a few minutes, and I'm eager to talk about what questions you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Darling-Hammond. That was just absolutely incredible. And thinking about the room of educators here who are all working to create a more equitable and accessible world for our students, just really appreciate all of the knowledge that you shared with us. And I saw many of you taking photos of the slides. We will have these to share after. We'll actually have an extended version of these slides. I had to cut Dr. Darling-Hammond down a little, so we have a larger deck to share out, and we'll be sure to get that to everyone here. Dr. Darling-Hammond, I know that you and I reviewed some questions, but we have such incredible questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump right into those immediately. And again, if you have a question, please feel free to share it in the app, and we will be sure to try and get to it. So kind of jumping right into the topic of equity. What do you see as the most critical factors for improving equity and quality in education systems, from wraparound services to increased family engagement? What can districts do to increase our collective impact?
Well, one of the things that we see, you talked about wraparound supports, is the emergence of community schools. Maryland, New York now fund them through a formula in high poverty schools. California has put $4 billion into community schools. These are schools that not only have the wraparound supports, health, mental health, social services, academic services, before and after school care, summer school, all of those things, but they also have a community connection with families and communities being involved in schools, and community connected learning, and through internships, projects, and a variety of other ways that kids can be really connected to the community, and adults in the community can support the schools. And what we saw in the pandemic is that when these schools were well designed, their students did so much better during the pandemic, and they have such lower rates of absenteeism now as folks are coming back. So that is certainly one thing that we can all be focusing on. It's too bad that we have to make up for such social deficiencies in the resources that go to children and families in this country, which is why some of those services are needed. But I think as we develop that in a robust way, it's going to be very, very important. We also know that when the American Rescue Plan Act was in full force, the child tax credit cut child poverty in half in this country in 1 year. And that the other investments that were made really supported a lot of the wraparound supports that were needed. We need to continue then in the future Congress to put that into play for the long haul. We can't keep doing this yo-yo diet of, here's a moment, we'll get some investment, then it goes away and we have to retool again. So I think that's a huge goal.
Amazing. Moving kind of into the teacher prep and engagement topic, how can we inspire a new generation of talented and passionate and of course, equity-minded individuals to enter the teaching profession? And what promising innovations in teacher prep give you hope for the future?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of programs that are doing extraordinary things in terms of really, creating a curriculum focused on deeper learning and equity, in playing that out in the partner schools where candidates are placed for student teaching or residencies, and then connecting that to the curriculum so there's a coherent experience focused on the child. We need to make teacher education of that kind affordable for our prospective teachers. In California, we've had a Golden State teacher grant for $20,000 a year for those who will go into teacher education to pay for that education. We have put in a lot of resources into residencies, which are programs where teachers come in, they're selected both by the sponsoring district and the School of Education typically. They get a full year of clinical practice under the wing of an expert teacher who is really one of the best teachers in the district, often in a school that's organized for that kind of training. And they get some kind of a salary or a living stipend, as well as free tuition, so that they can afford to get that kind of training. And then they promise 3 or 4 years of service to that district in response. We're finding that the residencies are viewed by candidates as the most effective pathways that they go through, that the candidates who go through those pathways are better prepared, and that they really do continue in the profession. More of them are candidates of color, 60%, over 60% in the last few years in California. And so we've got to start to develop these solutions that both improve the quality of preparation and also improve the affordability. I want to get to a day where we can say, if you will teach, we will pay for your education. That should be one of our goals, and we're working towards that in California. If I led the Biden transition team, I'm still working on that. If he has a second term, we need to really be transformative in our policy.
Yeah, I love that, and that's really interesting to hear that you're seeing really the success of the residency program, because I think that is a teacher prep pathway is doing amazing work to bring more teachers into the profession. We've received many questions, obviously, about AI and technology, so I'm gonna try and piece a couple of them together. So, as you know very well, we are an ed tech conference, and obviously AI is at the center of every conversation happening here at Summit. So really, in light of the ongoing conversations about integrating technology and AI into education, what are your thoughts on balancing technological advancements with traditional pedagogical approaches? And then what policies or frameworks do you believe are essential to ensure that these technology advancements enhance rather than undermine, the depth and personalization of learning that you so often speak about?
I love this question and I appreciate it. First of all, we have to have technology for all. We made progress during the pandemic, but way too many schools and states said, oh, now we want to get back to the old normal, and failed to continue to provide devices and connectivity for every child. So we need to, stay on that path, because that's, in fact, it would cost you less to be sure that every kid has a device and connectivity than to buy 5 textbooks that they're going to carry around in their backpack. So that's critically important, because we have a huge equity gap, as you know, around access to technology, which we've begun to close. Secondly, we know that I've done some synthesis of the research on uses of technology in learning. for blended learning. We want to take advantage of what we learned. When we use technology, not as an electronic workbook where you're kind of marching kids through some kind of routines, but in ways that are interactive, where they have opportunities as they are doing work to both revise their work to get sort of cognitive strategies and hints as they're continuing to do it. That makes a huge difference. And when they can have access to technology tools to use in different ways. So for example, if you're flipping the classroom and students are able to get a set of materials online at home, when they can use them in the ways that make sense to them. They may want to rewatch that lecture on the video or talk about it again in class so that they can access it in multiple ways. We see large gains. The interactivity is really interesting to me. There was a study that showed that studying the Underground Railway in history, kids who had a simulated PBS version of the Underground Railway, and it was an interactive piece with also some historical film involved, learn more about it than those who were just reading and talking about it in the classroom. Kids who were doing science simulations online were learning more effectively than kids who were just doing the simulations in the classroom. Now you have to have interactivity with other students and problem solving. You have to be the master of the technology rather than being used by the technology. And then with AI, it's so important that kids get a chance to actually use AI in school and then evaluate it, problem solve around it, and then jump off in their higher order skills of evaluation and use beyond it, rather than being told, pretend it's not there, AI is cheating, using AI tools is cheating, because the people who are going to succeed in the workplaces of today and tomorrow are those who really understand how to take advantage of the human tools we've created. And technology is a human tool, and it needs to be then used in ways that are very much analytic and allow us to do our best work to go much further in our abilities and our thinking. There's also a huge value for, we're all neurodiverse, and we think about students with disabilities, but there are lots of people who do their best work when they can use technology tools, whether it's speech to text or whether it's a variety of other ways that technology allows us to take in information, to understand it, and to demonstrate what we know and to use what we know. So I think we want to be able to show kids how to use the technologies rather than thinking of using those technologies as cheating.
Yes, and you would be happy to know how many conversations are happening at Summit about how we can be using AI and tech to prepare students for the workforce, as opposed to having them avoid using it. So in our last just couple minutes, we'll squeeze in one last question. So would love if you could just share what you see as promising educational trends that should influence future initiatives. And are there any particular developments that have reshaped your priorities or outlook for the future of learning?
Well, we see so many schools that are either new schools being designed, redesign of schools, but we also see micro schools popping up because for kids who are not experiencing success in our traditional schools, you see all of these pods and micro schools popping up to meet their needs. We need to look at that. We need to study that. We need to understand it. We need to be bringing the personalization that is occurring both in redesigned schools and in these sort of cross between homeschooling and small schooling into our thinking about not only the way in which we encourage schools to behave, but the policies we use that create a lot of the ongoing pressure to reinvent the factory model the way it's been. So I think I'm very excited to see the many ways in which people are reinventing the concept of education. And I want us to harness that in ways that then make it more widely available and not, again, as an exception to a norm that is still problematic. I'm very excited by what's going on in North Dakota, where they're supporting a lot of innovation. Rhode Island, New York has recently decided that they'll encourage lots of different assessment alternatives to the Regents exams, including many that are project-based, CTE-based, and so on. Indiana has just opened up its requirements at the secondary school level to allow for innovation, connected learning, and so on. So I'm excited by these glimpses of the possible future, and I really want us to figure out how to be very deliberate about bringing those into the way we think about policy in the future.
Incredible. Perfect timing. Dr. Darling-Hammond, we cannot thank you enough for just spending your morning with us. We're so honored to hear from you and learn from you. We will make your slides and your resources available. And thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you.